Well, one thing that's quite striking about modern rational culture is this insistence that the religious tradition of the West and the scientific tradition are somehow at fundamental odds. And the more, I used to believe that, I think, when I was young, at least to some degree, although now I'm very curious about where that idea came from, because it's absolutely clear, first of all, that the universities themselves emerged out of the monasteries. That's just completely unquestionable. Oxford and Cambridge are monasteries for all intents and purposes, and so the whole university idea emerged out of the church. And then the notion that the universe is in fact intelligible and that the pursuit of truth would be redemptive, that's a fundamentally religious idea. And then the scientific endeavor itself, given figures like Newton, for example, was embedded inside that religious tradition.
We tend to think of, in the modern world, of somehow that science and religion are opposing forces in the world, but historically that has not been the case. Historically, the scientists all have some sort of connection with religion.
Psalm 111, verse 2. That's the verse which is written at the entrance of the world's first scientific laboratory in Cambridge, Cavendish Laboratory. It says, "Majestic are the works of the Lord. Those who delight in them study them." Now, this idea had already been developing in Middle Ages, which was systematized by Francis Bacon, the father of modern science. And he says there is the book of God's words, which is the Bible, and the book of God's works, everything that God has done in nature. So majestic are the works of the Lord, that we should be reading the works of God. This is when modern science takes off.
Galileo Galilei is perhaps the most famous of the Renaissance scientists. He was very knowledgeable of the scriptures. And as a scientist, he was just trying to find out what it is that God wrote in the heavens. So he began to look at the nature of the universe, using the telescope to see that Saturn has rings, for example. In the 17th century, he published a series of works. One that got him into trouble a bit was his dialogue, because he kind of made fun of the Aristotelians. The Aristotelians, who believed everything could be proven simply by logic, were not dealing with empirical science the way he was.
Aristotle followed logic, that human logic can know truth. These people are observing. So Galileo, for example, climbs up the Leaning Tower of Pisa, drops 2 cannonballs, one heavy, one light. Aristotle has said that the heavier ball will fall faster. Galileo finds both are falling at the same time. So this new method that you go out and observe, then your logic should make sense of what's happening.
And out of this observational model, you develop experimental science.
We cannot confine God to our logic. We have to go out and observe what God has done in His freedom. This was the essence of shifting from the old instrument, which is that we can discover scientific truth through logic, to the modern science of Galileo and Newton.
Sir Isaac Newton is kind of the great rock star of 17th century science. As so many of the 17th century English scientists did, he came from a background associated with the church and had a certain amount of theological studies, but he also studied the world around him. And I think more than any scientist in the 17th century, Newton popularized the scientific method, and people picked it up and became amateur scientists themselves, many of whom in the 18th century also came from a similar church background.
Newton, for every one word he wrote on science, he wrote 3 or 4 words on the Bible. Mm-hmm. So he was studying...
With forays into alchemy as well. He's a very strange guy.
Yes, but when he's there in Cambridge, there is no Department of Science in Cambridge. He is there to study the Bible and to worship.
George Washington Carver, he's a very inspirational person, a man of humble origins who taught Sunday school for 30 years or so. He studied the peanut, of course, and came up with a crop that, as a legume, could actually help repair soils in the South that had been damaged by centuries of cotton production, and could produce a useful food crop that could help people out of poverty. He was very determined in his work, and when he had a setback, he turned to his faith.
Why didn't modern science develop in China? Why didn't it develop in India? Why did it develop in Europe? And why did these men come after 16th, particularly 17th century? Why not in the 15th century? This printing of this book changes everything, because it begins an intellectual revolution that now, if this is God's word, this has to reform our minds.
We don't know even now to what degree all of those scientific presuppositions are predicated on underlying Judeo-Christian concept, right? Because you have to believe the world has an intelligible order. You have to believe in a transcendent object if you're a scientist, or there's nothing to correct your theories.
Yeah.
Well, they also believe that investigation conducted in a spirit of truth is redemptive, because every scientist worth his or her salt is operating under the presupposition that the honest quest for truth and enlightenment is in fact a good. And that's a statement, that's an axiom of faith. And all the good scientists that I've known are possessed by a spirit of truth. They will allow the world to correct their erroneous presuppositions, and they do presume that in that quest is to be found, let's say, the betterment of the individual and human society. Those are all religious presuppositions as far as I'm concerned.